homesick with the temperature. I forgot I had a paper one, so I don't need my laptop.
All right, thank you everybody for showing up today for our third, I guess fourth, the one with Ken and three with me, budget workshops. So our goals today are sort of to go over past accomplishments, goals and objectives for next fiscal year, and then a summary of the budget. So what you also have in your possession is our draft operating budget, which we can go over in greater detail when I get to that point in the presentation. So our accomplishments today of this fiscal year are broken down into 6 areas: program management, land acquisition, management and monitoring, restoration, the Burrowing Owl program, and the regional general permit. So from a program management standpoint, on implementation and trainings, we have these meetings with the boards. We were involved in a lot of stakeholder processes. There's the plan interpretation and clarification memos, which is sort of refining the plan document to work more for on the ground, real everyday challenges that we face, and making sure that the plan is flexible and sort of can be modified to meet those challenges. And you know, the plan is just this static document, and so we have this process of getting these, as Ann's been a part of a couple of Monoxy too, of getting these interpretation and clarification and modification approvals. And we've had some pretty good success lately getting a couple key ones done. One which is on the implementation board agenda, which Jerry Haas will be presenting to you. So permit compliance and annual report. We negotiated 2 mitigation-only agreements with Caltrans. We executed a land management cost share agreement with OSA for the Coyote Ridge property. We're starting the process of creating the 501c3, and hopefully we'll get that done by the end of this fiscal year or early next fiscal year. We're discussing some potential partnership opportunities with the Silicon Valley Land Conservancy, and I've met with their board members. I have another meeting with their board members next Monday and their executive director about opportunities of maybe sharing staff costs, using them to help us with conservation easements and different. They're also meeting with the Farm Bureau and OSA, because they're trying to figure out how they can grow and adapt, and they're exploring opportunities of partnering. We're also going to do a training for San Jose staff. San Jose's hired a lot of new planners, a lot of new building inspectors, a lot of new engineers, so we want to have a training to get those folks up to speed on the plan.
So can I ask, is this
Yes.
partnership the one we talked about last meeting?
Yes, exactly.
But we haven't committed to anything.
No, we haven't committed to anything, and the board would have to approve any sort of agreement that we might reach with them on anything. Yeah, they sent us a list, Valerie and I, a list of about, 20 questions that they want answered when we meet with them on Monday. So I think that'll determine how things move forward. Oh, yes?
Would you mind saying who or what the Silicon Valley Land Conservancy?
Yes, so they're a land trust, local land trust. I don't know all the members on their board, but they have a board made up of ex-county folks. They have a couple farmers on their board.
They're more like a regional, like Coast?
Yeah, yes, exactly, yes.
They have a website. If you type in Silicon Valley Land Trust or Land Conservancy.
Thank you, appreciate it.
And they're very small, and they haven't bought any, they haven't taken on any new easements or land holdings in 10 years. So they're sort of going through a process of what are we going to be in the future, and they're exploring opportunities of trying to partner or do joint ventures with different organizations, and they've approached us too. So we've done website updates and improvements. So this is all part of the public outreach, developing a social media strategy and outreach material. I put on next to you, which I'll talk about during my EO report, an outreach material that we put together for the National HCP Coalition. They're going to Washington next week to lobby Congress to continue funding for the work we do. There's people from Texas and Florida and the Midwest that are going to be joining Californians to lobby Congress. We developed a legislative priority handout, which I shared with you at the last meeting. We do a lot of presentations, lobbying trips, as noted, to Washington and Sacramento. I attended the second National HCP Coalition meeting and assisted with bylaws creation and organizational fundraising. Written correspondence to our state and federal electeds. Regional Conservation Investment Strategy, I'm a member of the TAC for that effort. And that's a NCCP light, I would call it. There's no permit associated with it, but it's an attempt to try to provide streamlining, a framework for streamlined permitting for projects not covered by the Habitat Plan or outside the Habitat Plan area. We've attended a lot of stakeholder meetings, as I noted. We're also working with the STRAW program and Point Blue, supporting their efforts, sustaining a network of teachers, students, restoration specialists, community members, that's off their webpage, to plan and implement watershed restoration. So they're doing a project on the Gonzales farm, Gonzales Ranch, just east of Gilroy. There's schools from Hollister, Gilroy, and other schools in the region that are going out there on various days in March and April to plant trees and do a riparian restoration. And the Nature Conservancy and Point Blue are the lead on that, working with the STRAW program, and we help fund the restoration. And we're also going to be out there talking to the kids about what we do. So from a finance standpoint, it's we've gone through our third audit, third AB 1600 report. We set up a Safe Harbor 401k program. We will be hiring a CPA to advise on and oversee fiscal functions. We're hoping to hire that person or that consultant either the end of this fiscal year or early next fiscal year, working on developing in-house payroll function and in-house accounts payable function. It's been a great year for grants, and I sort of threw the PG&E money that's going to help with an acquisition. So $14.5 million in grant funding or other funding not anticipated, like the PG&E, and we projected it to be about $3.1 million in this area. So I would say we've done a great job bringing in outside funding. The caveat is almost all that money, 13 million of it, has to go towards an acquisition. So if we don't acquire a property within the next 3 years with most of that funding, it will go away. 4.3 million in revenues from covered projects. We had projected 12 million. And the discrepancy, as I noted in the January meeting, is due to, there was a couple San Jose projects that we all thought were going to happen this fiscal year and didn't. We had a great meeting with San Jose planning staff, and they really gave us a good breakdown of what they think is going to happen end of this year and next year. So I think the projections that we're showing in this year's budget and for next year's projections are going to be a lot more in line with reality. And so I'm very, the number that we're projecting for revenues for next year, I think is going to be pretty accurate. So as noted, we selected Silicon Valley Community Foundation as our institutional investor for the endowment. From a policies and procedures standpoint, there are these nitrogen deposition fees that projects pay. And in the urban areas, projects that are less than 2 acres don't pay the nitrogen fee. But we've put out a memo that we're going to share with the co-permittees soon, sort of laying out that we don't have regulatory authority over projects less than 2 acres in the plan area. And we went back and looked over at the comments on the CEQA document and the various iterations of the plan over time. And it's pretty clear that we don't have regulatory authority on that. But through the CEQA process, we do feel that projects should at least address their nitrogen deposition impacts through their CEQA document. But it would be the responsibility of the lead agency through the CEQA process to work that out with the project proponent through the initial checklist. And that's something that we're going to it's just policy guidance for the cities, and then it's up to them on how they want to implement it and how it dovetails with their own policies and their own land use laws and regulations. Because we've been getting pressure from the federal and state governments saying, well, what about all these projects that aren't covered by the plan that are impacting? So this is our way of addressing it and telling them that this was the agreement, but because they had threatened to start writing comment letters on all projects. So we're hoping we can nip that in the bud. So and there are some projects that all they do pay is nitrogen, so we did create a form and a process for those projects where they don't have to go through the whole 9 yards of filling out an application. I mentioned the clarification and interpretation determination memo, and here's one of them. It was temporary project impacts for in-stream projects. This was a request from county roads and airports, and Jerry will be talking to the board about this later today. We're also there's a lot of confusion about what is a plant occurrence and plant survey protocols, so we wrote some memos that'll be coming out soon that are sort of providing some clarification on that for the co-permittees. We have, from a staffing standpoint, we have 4 full-time and 1 half-time person, including that includes me. We have accounting, financial, and legal services that are outsourced through contracts. ICF is helping us with implementation on things that staff from a technical standpoint or a capacity standpoint. DUDEC is helping us with integrating the 401, that's the Regional Water Quality Board permitting process with our RGP and ESA permits. We have a contract with county parts for grant services if needed. We also have a contract with county planning for GIS support services. And then we have consultants helping out with land transactions and habitat restoration, design, and construction projects. So from a land acquisition standpoint, it was a lot of talking with landowners about acquiring land, but the only property we will be enrolling in the reserve system is that 55.4 acre Caltrans property along Highway 152 that they're donating to us. It looks like high-speed rail will be going through the site. So, but this is a property donation, and the important thing about this property is the opportunity for sycamore alluvial restoration and for connectivity. So it's, even though it's a small property, it's important for those 2 reasons. And there's an overpass right near the property, which will allow wildlife to easily pass from one side of 152 to the other. So sort of having that enrolled will check a box for us via connectivity requirements.
Edmund, if I may.
Yes.
You mentioned your meeting with San Jose and everything went real well, and they gave you a more accurate picture on what
Yes.
was likely.
Yes.
I think in the projection that you gave us before, and I don't think I'm going outside of closed session conversations, but in conversations we had before, there was an estimate by you in your budgets of probable potential land acquisitions over the next couple of years, getting towards our goal. And you mentioned this 55.4 acres as the only one during what period of time? Calendar year 2016?
Yeah, it would be,
You're
yeah.
reporting calendar year or fiscal
Oh,
year?
it'd be this fiscal year. Yeah, fiscal year 17, yeah.
Ending June 30th,
Yes,
17?
correct,
Okay.
correct.
And as far as an update on what other projects, whether properties are likely to come into the plan, is that in here somewhere? Is that-
Yes, it's mentioned just below that with land enrollment update. And I can give you, yeah, which is not a closed session issue, so I can give you a little bit of update on
Okay.
Rancho El Toro and Richmond Ranch. So, yes,
My point was, the last couple of years, we've thought certain acquisitions would take place,
correct,
and they didn't.
no,
And so it's, I think we're all very interested in it being as realistic as possible
yes,
in saying, and if we overachieve, that's great.
right,
But at the same time, I'm looking at our expenses, you know, versus our income, and this plan, this model needs to be able to continue.
yes.
And that's, okay, thank you, I'm interested in
Yes.
the El Toro.
So we have about 8.5 to 9 million for acquisitions. And the good news on both the Rancho El Toro and the Richmond Ranch potential acquisitions is that we're partnering with a lot of other people to acquire those acreages. The Rancho El Toro is 12,221 acres, and we would partner with the Nature Conservancy and the Moore Foundation, possibly PG&E, and us. And if you could think of and we just submitted an offer letter. Well, will be submitted either tomorrow or Monday, because there were prospective buyers for Rancho El Toro who pulled out. So now we're back in the game for that property. Both myself and Mike Connor from TNC were talking to their broker, Pete Clark, on Thursday, yesterday or Wednesday? Wednesday, thank you. And they were in the process of processing the cancellation paperwork, as we called. There's some stuff I'll share with you in closed section at the next IB meeting. I'll get into details on what all transpired with that. But the good news is that we're back in the game with that property. And it would be equal shares of us and PG&E sort of representing one share. It may be all of us, it depends on Richmond, or maybe partially PG&E. And then equal shares from the Moore Foundation and from TNC. So the hit to the agency would be up to 5 million is what we're thinking. For Richmond Ranch,
I'm sorry, that was the investment by the agency?
Yes.
Maybe up to what?
yeah, for El Toro.
I thought I heard hit to the agency.
Yeah, hit, yeah.
Okay,
You probably heard correctly.
okay.
The expenditure to the agency, yeah.
Because a hit's a negative thing.
Yes,
And
yeah.
it's a positive thing that we're
Yeah,
doing.
I would
for a
say
reason.
the budget outlay would be roughly 5 million. Richmond Ranch, the good news there is we get a lot of funding partners for that, including PG&E, the Moore Foundation, It's looking like County Parks is going to participate, OSA, not all the acres, and then there are various grants from the federal and state government. Not all of the ranch would be enrolled in the reserve system. About 2,100 of the 3,700 acres would be. And the agency would be acquiring 4 of the 8 parcels that are part of that deal. And eventually the land would be given to either OSA or county parks, depending on discussions with those 2 entities, all the acreage. So somewhere between 3.5 and 4 million will be what the agency would contribute towards that. There's an offer in on that ranch in addition to ours, which is, from what I understand, higher than our offer, so we may lose this one. The thing is, if the people are buying it with the idea that they can develop 60 or 70 homes out there, I don't think the county zoning would allow that to happen. So it depends how sophisticated these buyers are. If they do their due diligence and they're thinking about building a lot of homes out there, then they'll realize that it's not going to happen. They have rights by zoning, but not rights by doing a cluster development similar to what Young Ranch is trying to do. So I think it'll all depend on what the objective of these prospective buyers is, and what they deem their risk for making this investment. And if they just want to own a really expensive ranch because they think it's beautiful, then we're out of luck. We've also have had discussions with Dr. Lamont about his property. That's sort of on the back burner right now, given the 2 above. The UTC Phase 2, so that's the Pratt Whitney United Technology Corporation. It's the rest of their property. And we're in negotiations with them, us and OSA. And we've made it clear to them that given the amount of money that would have to be spent and some of the challenges with part of the site going through active cleanup, phasing that acquisition over time, maybe just doing a conservation easement over the areas that have the contaminant plumes. So they're a lot more open than they were originally with sort of structuring a deal that works for us and OSA. So if Rancho El Toro doesn't happen and Richmond Ranch doesn't happen, then probably UTC will rise up as something we could do a phase of it now versus later, because our grant funding can be spent on that property too. Sergeant Ranch, that's something we're not a lead on, but we've been in contact with TNC and Post about that property, and we may be a funding partner on that as it moves through the negotiation process. And we're always out trying to get more funding, and had a good meeting with some water district staff recently about some of their grant programs where they have money earmarked for the Habitat Agency, and hopefully that money will be freed up soon. And as I noted earlier, we've secured nearly $14 million in funding for land acquisitions.
So Ed, I have a question.
Yes.
I forgot. Was there a certain point in time where we had to have a certain number of acres enrolled in the land?
And Tara's going to give a presentation on the annual report at the next IB meeting and the governing board meeting after that. And there are different targets that we have to hit based on types of habitats that are impacted. But once the Calero Park properties enrolled in the reserve system, we'll be okay on almost all the metrics. So we're a little bit behind right now on riparian and stream corridor, but we're generally doing okay. I mean, we're way ahead on serpentine, we're doing well with burrowing owls. So but there are a couple areas we're a little behind on, but by enrolling Clara, that kind of takes care of it. And then if we acquire Richmond or El Toro, then we're going to be way ahead. Yeah. So one of the things we have to do is sort of manage and monitor the lands that we're thinking of buying or that we have acquired. And we've started a lot of that work out at Coyote Ridge. We're also starting to do that work at Calero with the anticipation of it being enrolled in the reserve system very soon. And we also did some surveys at the Lamont and Richmond Ranch properties for amphibians. PG&E paid for that because that's something we don't have to do, but we did learn a lot about what's there and what's not there. So we're also into year 2 of the Coyote Ceanothus Creation Project, which is one of the requirements of the plan, and so far so good. One of the biggest challenges for us in this plan, and we'll have a presentation to the board on what's going on with burrowing owls during the joint meeting. And we spent a lot of time and money in trying to recover western burrowing owls in the county. They're primarily in the north of the county, in the city of San Jose and Mountain View out at Moffett. So they're in areas that are either have been developed or threatened by development, or in the case of Moffett are going through a lot of development pressure from activities out there. So we're trying to save the birds from going locally extinct, and that's why we have that extra burrowing owl fee, and that's why we spend a lot of time and money trying to save the birds. So we commissioned an experts workshop to inform our conservation strategy. So we had burrowing owl experts come from Arizona, Canada, and from Southern California that came here and gave us, we gave them a tour of the plan area, and they gave presentations on the work they're doing in other parts of North America. And our local experts and the agency sat down with them and sort of brainstormed some things that we could be doing better, or things that we hadn't thought about that may help save the birds. Ultimately, the big challenge for the bird, yes?
Has there been any more movement on getting some of those northern cities to participate in the HCA, especially with
Mountain View is, they're moving probably not like the co-permittees did in 2007 or 2005 when this stuff was starting to get discussed. So they asked us to come up with what it would cost them to amend our plan for inclusion into the habitat plan. And we're going to set up a meeting with them to go over what kind of covered activities they would want, how much land conversion do they think is going to happen. And if their covered activities are similar to our covered activities, I'm not, and if the amount of impacts that they're anticipating aren't that great, I don't think it would be too costly for them to pay for amending our plan to include them into the plan area. But I think that will determine on their next steps. They've been having problems with the regulators managing lands in the shoreline area because of its impact on burrowing owls. In the past, they didn't have to do CEQA work for that, or CEQA analysis for that, and they were told recently by DFW, Department of Fish and Wildlife, California, that they need to develop a CEQA for all the work they're doing out at the shoreline and its impacts on burrowing owls and other species. So they're now kind of understanding the advantages of being part of this. And if they do become part, then the big benefit for us is burrowing owls, because they have, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's Mountain View. What about Sunnyvale?
No, they're pretty built out, and they haven't expressed any interest. Santa Clara, maybe before Levi was built and a lot of those things might have been a good, if that land was still undeveloped, and they had big plans for it, it might have been worthwhile sort of seeing if they would want to partner. Yeah.
To follow up on that, the
Yeah.
Santa Clara property across from the stadium, where the golf course was, that's an enormous development under consideration.
Yes, and we wrote comment letters on that. I think the city of San Jose is litigating them
Okay.
on various impacts of that project, including the impacts on
Traffic,
Burrowing Owls.
housing.
Yeah, traffic, Burrowing Owls.
Okay.
They did agree to pay the nitrogen fees. Yes. Do you have any comment on that, or?
I think I would echo what you just summarized.
Mhm.
The major comments were related to traffic, of course, owl habitat, and other lack of housing, basically.
For the jobs.
City of San Jose is left with all the housing
Mm-hmm.
needs. But, you know, we are, as far as I understand, in the process of looking into that between the two.
Mm-hmm. And Valerie has contacted the attorneys at San Jose and asking about how potentially we could participate if a settlement isn't reached.
I'm curious about the aspect of burrowing owl, because from what I understand, their habitat and these populations are all along the bay. And any potential partnership with BCD?
We are partnering with Don Edwards Wildlife Reserve, and we are paying for burrowing owl management out at the Warm Springs unit where there are owls. And we're going to ask the wildlife agencies to approve, I don't want to call it an amendment, a modification to our plan to allow us to do conservation actions in San Benito County, where there are burrowing owls there, and trying to increase the burrowing owl population along the Pajaro River. I wish that had been done originally, but there's a lot of reasons why it wasn't. But there's owls that are breeding on farmland right along that, and the Wildlands Mitigation Bank, there's owls breeding there too. So it's an opportunity, hopefully, where we could try to establish a population, or increase the population down there. And they've also, one of the things the experts discussed was translocation of the birds. And that's very controversial. So we're also thinking about captive breeding, working with some of the wildlife recovery centers to do captive breeding of the young to try to increase success, fledgling success. So there's a lot of pretty intensive things that we're hoping to do. It's contingent upon funding, of course, and but it's there's a lot of things that we'll be doing with this species that we don't do with the rest of them. Yeah.
You know,
They're
and
fast evolving to be urbanized. The ones at the airport are quite urbanized ones.
Oh, they are.
I heard that population is declining too, but, you know, we didn't include all that in the beginning, the Pajaro stuff or the San Benito County stuff, because at that time, developing the burrowing owl strategy there was hope. It's kind of like the hope is dwindling.
It is.
I mean, it's because so much development. I mean, obviously.
Yeah.
That's too bad.
The birds picked the wrong place to.
Well,
They were
To be
there
blunt.
first, I'm
it's
sure.
just, yeah.
I,
I mean, I don't know what, because, I mean, I was involved with burrowing owl stuff back in the 90s when I lived in Morgan Hill. And those birds that were all in those lots, even though those lots are vacant now, still, they're all the birds are gone.
yeah.
Because of the development surrounding the area.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the main thing we're worried about with the population out at the wastewater treatment plant is the areas around the buffer land. So there's 200 acres that won't be developed. As those areas develop, it's the loss of the foraging habitat is our concern. And you know, I understand why San Jose needs to develop those lands. So I'm not here to judge that, but the realities are that it's going to put more pressure on the birds, and that's why translocation has to be looked at, and it has mixed success. And that's why working, hopefully in San Benito County, we might be able to try. We still have 45 years to try to correct this, but we are seeing signs of concern with the burrowing owl now. Unlike the other species, we have some concerns with some of the plants, but again, we have time to try to get this stuff right. But it's good to try to work on it now, for we're not in crisis in year 40 or something.
It's too late, yeah.
So, some good news, the Clara Pond and Wetland Restoration Project construction. Here's a picture of, and Tara Donovan was the project manager on this, and she did a great job supervising the construction of this project. And here's a picture of the construction they were doing out at the pond, putting down a liner to deepen the pond and hold water better. So there's a hydro period needed for the salamander and the red-legged frog. They need standing water until late June, July for the salamander, and July, early August for the red-legged frog. There's a before and after picture, and then we also did a wetland restoration. You can see the before and after picture there. So the project, the construction cost $340,078.26. And the San Jose Water Company paid for $58,580 of that cost. So our cost was $281,498. And we get credit for creating habitat for the frogs and salamanders, and we also got credit for creating and restoring wetland habitat through the 404 and 401 processes. So those are the water regulators gave us credit for doing this too. So the regional general permit, it's really starting to jump. We just had Roads and Bridges contacted Jerry today, and they have 3 bridge projects in the Morgan Hill area that they'd like to seek RGP coverage. City of San Jose is doing a lot of outfall projects that will be covered by the RGP. There's a couple private projects also, one in Gilroy, one in Morgan Hill, that are utilizing this. So it's really a good thing for project proponents. As I noted, Calero Park and the Guadalupe River restoration area, which was a project done by the city before this agency existed, are restoration sites that are advanced mitigation areas for utilizing the RGP. So really we're up to 8 RGP applications being processed.
Great.
Didn't have time to change it today. So we're working towards the 401 certification of the RGP, as I noted, getting the regional and state water quality control boards to integrate their process with our RGP and our habitat plan. We also submitted a draft in lieu fee prospectus to the interagency review team. So that's to integrate the fee side, the fee collection side of the RGP with the habitat plan. So there's an important reason why we want to do an in lieu fee program, because then we can, instead of building projects before projects have impacts, this allows us to collect money and then do projects as we collect enough money and implement projects for wetland and stream restoration, not unlike we do for the species fees we currently collect. So this will allow us a lot more flexibility to collect fees over time, and not always being trying to rush out and do a construction project in advance of projects that we think will be coming down the pipe. So this is what was always intended with the regional general permit to set up an in lieu fee program. Essentially what we have for the Habitat Agency now is an in lieu fee program. We collect fees and then at some later date we buy land or we restore that land.
Have you looked very thoroughly at how much revenue you can make from this in the future over?
Yeah, the revenues will be minimal because the Habitat fees are de facto fees for the 404 impacts. We do charge an application processing charge, which is $5,000. And that just covers our staff's time to process their applications and work with the core staff on making sure it's compliant with the terms of the regional general permit. But it'll never be much of a generator.
Okay.
Yeah. It's more for the benefits of the project proponents, yeah. So goals and objectives for next fiscal year. I sort of covered number one already. We're hoping we can come back to depending on how much we're spending, either the governing board or implementation board to approve a sale agreement with either the Richmond Trusts or the Rancho El Toro family. Clara, we're having some challenges with sort of integrating the park charter fund with in the expectations of that with the expectations of the wildlife agencies, and we're working through some nuances with the conservation easement template. We're going to get all the attorneys together in a room sometime soon and hopefully work through some of the, I wouldn't call them big challenges, just small challenges of getting different sort of local government priorities aligned with federal government and state government expectations. I recently met with Google, and they were very open to working with us on burrowing owl conservation, and I'm cautiously optimistic that maybe we can execute a burrowing owl management agreement with NASA and Google out there. The San Felipe Creek construction at Grant Park, I'm expecting it to be completed, or at least partially completed next year. We're also looking at pond restoration design to be completed next year up at Coyote Ridge. I hope we have a Friends of the Habitat Agency 501c3 created, and then we can invest our endowment fund with the Silicon Valley Community Foundation.
That's what the 501c is called, Friends of the?
Yeah, it's a name that Valerie and I sort of bantered about.
Oh, she looks at you like.
Yeah. Do you remember we were thinking about calling it the Friends Group?
So actually, in the process of submitting a name reservation form, and we can put 3 names on the form, and the first name on the form is Friends of the Silicon Valley, Santa Clara Valley Habitat Agency. And then I think I flipped it around as the second choice and said something like Santa Clara Valley Habitat Agency Friends. But so hopefully, I mean, I can't imagine that name has been taken by anyone, so that would probably be the name that we have to go through a process to get the name reserved first and then do these other things. And we've got all these documents ready to go, but we have to start with the first domino.
And if you all have a name that you're burning, email me. We'll add it to the list.
I forgot we were Santa Clara Valley, not Santa Clara County.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess I can talk a little bit about the rumblings in Washington given this Section 6 grant proposal. We just submitted, we just got $2 million through this program. We just submitted an application for another 2, and we will submit another one next fiscal year. The good news is that Congressman Calvert of West Riverside County is a big supporter of HCPs. He has 2 HCPs in his district, and he's chairman of the Appropriations Committee, I think, and he has quite a bit of sway. He is supportive. He's definitely, there's bipartisan support for this program. Does that mean it'll be here next year? I have no idea. What's happening to EPA doesn't really affect us. I mean, personally, I'm concerned about what's going on with the defunding of all the climate change research and programs, but that doesn't affect us. I'm concerned about staffing, because right now we have a Fish and Wildlife staff person, Joseph Terry. He's great, shows up to all the meetings, very responsive. It helps with the running of the agency, because they have to approve things. So if there's big budget cuts, then it potentially could affect how quickly things are turned around. The Department of Interior recently appointed Cabinet Director Zinke. He's not, I mean, he has different views on different things, but he's been very supportive of public lands in the past. There's a big HCP in Montana, which Montana is part of the National Coalition. The state forests, the state of Montana forest lands, there's an HCP for them. So, and he's aware of that. Montana's a small population-wise, it's small. Everybody knows everybody there. So I know he knows the people that my peers in Montana.
Is he from Montana?
He is, yeah. And he's married to a woman from Santa Barbara, so there isn't necessarily the same level of let's defund this agency, let's defund these programs that you find with EPA and some other programs. But yeah, I'm not telling anybody anything that they don't already know. Things are fluid with this president, and priorities change quickly. So I don't know. He has some big. He wants to spend a lot on infrastructure, wants to spend a lot on defense. So what gets cut, what gets traded off, who knows? So the good news is that we do have local foundations that are very supportive. Tara and I got off the phone with Moore Foundation yesterday, and they view, they had a property in Napa, and our 2 projects, Richmond Ranch and El Toro's, they viewed as their top priorities for the whole Bay Area. So it's we're developing a good relationship with them, and hopefully with Google and some of the other tech companies, we can start developing relationships with them. Google has been helping fund some of the research that's going on with Phytophthora. It's a pathogen that affects plants, and with sycamore alluvial work. So, and there might be an opportunity, at least from a research standpoint, to get them to help with that, and maybe even in the future try to get them to see if they'd be interested, like the Packards and the Moores, to help with actually bigger things like acquiring land. The local assistant grant programs, we've been very successful in securing funding through those, so we'll submit a couple more of those. I put this on here. I don't know how long this will take to get a 401 certification of our regional general permit, but we've had some really good discussions with the regional board, and our DUDEC consultants are putting together a aquatic resource plan, and it's integrating a lot of the 401 regs, and I'm cautiously optimistic that we will be able to get that 401 certification or some sort of integration with the regional boards for most of our covered activities. And I mentioned the in lieu fee program. We're also beginning to develop an online interactive species monitoring database, and that's an effort to get everything online for when somebody's out in the field. Things can be done in real time, where you'd be working with a tablet and you'll be able to enter your results of some of your tests, and it'll be integrated, and all the consultants and staff people that we have doing monitoring would all be working off the same system. Complete the amphibian and plant surveys at Clara. That's an easy one. We're going to start looking at 5-year budget projections. And based on some of the information the city gave us, City of San Jose gave us, and sort of the growth controls that Morgan Hill has, I think we can do that. And we'll sit down with Gilroy staff and try to get a sense of what they think is happening. And the public works departments like VTA and county roads and bridges, they generally have a good idea what projects they think will be happening, and we'll be able to give the board a better sort of future view. I know this year is still projected to be a growth year in terms of housing prices and development, but a lot of people are talking about things slowing down sometime next year, possibly early 2019. Our fees are staggered, and they come in kind of waves, like getting the call from Roads and Bridges today about they need coverage for 3 bridge projects. And that's something they hadn't even anticipated. So we still operate a little bit by the seat of our pants, but we're going to try to minimize that going forward. So we'll get into some of the numbers now. So on page 21 of your presentation, we're looking at revenue projections here. And this is our best guesstimate based on meeting with all the co-permittees. And the co-permittees' best guesstimate of what they think revenues will be. And we were conservative this year compared to 16-17. I'm in defense of our estimates and in defense of the information we got. I think people did think these projects were going to come in, and but I got to really compliment Monoxy. She's really got into the weeds on the phasing of a lot of these projects in the city, and kind of gave us a really good blueprint of what she thinks is her. And I'm very confident in the numbers that she gave us, and it gives us an idea of that a couple of these projects had phases to them that I don't think were realized before. And this kind of gives us a clear-eyed estimate of what we think fees will be, revenues will be from fees. And grants, I got the Section 6 grant in there, but given our good relations with Moore Foundation and others, if that $2 million goes away for Section 6, we might be able to get $2 million from somebody else. So it's a conservative estimate, but I think it's safe. I'm not saying $8 million. The Water District program, I'm hoping, will be coming online next year, and there'll be funding available through that for acquisitions. So it's on us to acquire some of these lands too. The frustrating thing is we got the funding lined up for both El Toro and Richmond Ranch. It's just if we can be first at the table or not. And the other problem is these landowners think their land is worth more than what an appraisal says it's worth. That's the other challenge.
That happens often.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and we can do a little bit over appraised value, but not like some private entity that really wants something.
Do you see things like people saying,
Well, this Richmond Ranch property, who knows if it would be a cash deal or not. Yeah. El Toro seems to be overpriced for the ranching community. It's too expensive for ranchers. I've talked to a couple ranchers, and TNC have talked to a couple ranchers, and that's their conclusion. So it's whether there's anybody other than a rancher who'd want to acquire that property. So you got organizations like ours, and then ranchers. So if there's somebody else we don't know about, that's the unknown with that property. Richmond, given it's so close to San Jose, I still think people believe it has development potential. So there might be somebody who would write a check for it, thinking they could build 60 to 100 homes, and the county's going to change all its land use laws. Yeah. Yeah. And this is our expectations, and we can drill down into any of these numbers if anybody here today would like to. So this is our best guess of what we think our expenses will be. So our estimated actual for this year are about 3.2 million. We had a budget in for almost 3.7. So we're anticipating a little over 3.7 this year. Sitting down with staff yesterday, and we're still trying to figure out what staff can, because we just added a couple people, what staff can do and what consultants can do. And on the technical and permitting support, I believe we can reduce that number by 10 to 20%.
If I may, one of the big arguments for increasing the staff
Yes,
was to decrease the consultants.
exactly. And we're doing that.
Great.
And we're doing that. And I think we can do it even more on technical permitting and support. Conservation strategy implementation of the 2.1, 1.2 million of that is San Felipe Creek construction and first year of monitoring. So that's a big chunk of that. And then there's some plant surveys that we're doing that are expensive out at Clara. So those are the big chunks on that 2.1. And the San Felipe Creek is a one-time expense. One thing that, given sort of some of the political and economic uncertainty, we're going to hold off on doing any more construction projects. We're going to do the Coyote Ridge Ponds one, and then we're going to hold off for a little bit unless the fees seem to justify moving forward. So that'd give us 3 constructed habitat projects and a couple smaller burrowing owl ones. So I think that, so we can, that's one area very easily that we can cut back on expenses going into fiscal year 18-19 and beyond. I'm thinking even more for 19-20. And the technical and permitting support, that will continue to shrink also as we get the water permitting, the in lieu fee program adopted, and as we find out if we can, and my sense is we can integrate the 401 permitting into this and get that done, and as staff takes on more of what consultants did, I think that's an area that we can really reduce also. So finally, I believe this budget will be, that's going to be submitted to the governing board for their approval. Let's see, I'm not reading correctly what I have here. Final Habitat Agency budget will be submitted to the governing board for their approval on June 15th, 2017. So there will be some adjustments. We're going to get some information actually today from Gilroy on what they think will be happening with projects in Gilroy next year. And we're trying to fine tune the numbers with county roads and airports. And we'll have a better sense of how we can save money in that technical permitting category for appropriations. So, any questions? Okay. Yes.
Going back to that nitrogen deposition fee?
Yes.
Properties less than 2 acres.
Yes.
So what then, since the agencies are commenting on that through CEQA, are those developers or owners, are they being charged any new fee?
No. So we've written, we've written some comment letters on projects outside the plan area, and sometimes they ignore us, and sometimes they say, okay, we have to be responsive to this sort of impact, and they pay our fees. So right now, no. They're saying they have either no impacts, or the habitat plan is, and our fees we already collect are taking care of this problem, so they don't need to address it. What we're saying is, if a 20-story tower is built in downtown San Jose that's generating thousands of cars, we have no regulatory authority over that. But to ignore it is probably not smart on the part of the project proponent, because the environmental groups have been calling us about some of these projects, and so there's potential litigation, and we tell them we don't have regulatory authority over that. It's not something we deal with. And we looked into whether we do, because at one time the plan was going to be bigger. I think you all remember those days when it was going to be the $1 billion plan. Well, they scaled it back, and part of the scaling back also occurred in the cities, where this 2-acre threshold was established. And so we can't go in there and say anything other than, well, no, we don't cover that. But from a project proponent standpoint, there's different ways to mitigate for traffic. You can pay for van pools. You can do transportation demand management. There's a lot of things that people can do that I believe could pay down what they'd owe on that fee. But it's just something that they just need to work through their CEQA process, because it's been determined through our CEQA NEPA document that this is an impact on the rural landscape, and it's impacting all habitat types. And there's elevated levels of nitrates in our creeks, and it's not just because of nitrogen deposition, there's other reasons for it too. But so it's not something that me personally believes that an applicant should ignore, but that's something they need to work out through city planning departments, county planning, and the CEQA process. And that's basically what our memo is going to say. To ignore this, do so at your own risk, basically. Yeah. You're welcome. Yes.
Thank you for the presentation. For the record, my name is Doug Muirhead. I live in Morgan Hill. A comment and a question. The comment has to do with the word stakeholder, which you only used once in the public outreach. You probably have a good understanding of what that means inside the agency. I'm not sure that the majority of the residents of the county would necessarily know what you mean by that. And my biggest concern with the casual use of stakeholder is, in other agencies like OSA and the Water District, it does not include the residents of the county, who are the people that will live with the decisions you're making. So I'd like you to be a little bit sensitive to that distinction, if
Yes.
you wouldn't mind. My question is, a couple of times you've you've looked on the good graces of the county and their land use policies as perhaps facilitating or protecting your ability to acquire land. And I'm curious to what degree you're working with county planning and OSA on their CAP program. There was a presentation, I believe, at the last Hewlett meeting by county planning where we got a little hint of some of the ideas they have for tools in their toolbox, including some regulatory changes that would make it easier to perhaps build a little house on a corner of a piece of land and farm the rest, which would probably not help you out at all. So I'm curious to what degree you're involved with what they're doing, since it sounds like you have some hopes that what they're doing is going to help you. Thank you very much, though.
Sure. So to your comment, by stakeholder, I meant we're a stakeholder in these processes, and so we're part of that Pajaro Compass, the One Water planning that the Water District's doing. So we as the agency are a stakeholder, and in some of those groups, the public is involved. Others they're not. Yeah, and I'll explain myself better next time on the stakeholder issue. It's complicated. So from our standpoint, we can be a big winner with a cluster development because, and I don't want to weigh into the politics of some of the proposals that are before the county and the city, but if a project comes in and it's a 2,000 acre parcel and they want to develop 100 acres of it, and they're willing to cluster their development on 100 acres of it, that and the rest of it they're willing to give to the Habitat Agency to offset their fees, or a proportion thereof, and it's a type of land we really need to enroll in the reserve system. That's a good thing for us. Yeah. So in a lot of cases, to allow a small section of a property, and there's some principles. There's conservation development or conservation subdivision rules that have been. One of the big proponents of it is this gentleman by the name of Randall Arndt, who's written a lot on conservation subdivisions. And I would encourage you to look at some of his ideas. And development and conservation can be compatible if done correctly. Not always. But if the county and OSA work out some sort of change to county land use that allows a part of 1,000 or 4,000 or 100 acre parcel to be developed, and it's the right kind of land for us, and they want to offset their fees through land. I wouldn't call it a donation, but the land would be put up in lieu of the fees. That we're generally okay with that. Yep. You're welcome.
I just have a question on the wonderful burrowing owl picture. How are those little guys just not eaten up by everybody?
I know. They, you mean eaten up in terms of love?
By snakes, coyotes?
Oh, they are. That's part of their problem, especially when they're near an urban area. Cats are one of the threats. Yep.
I mean, it just looks like easy pickings.
Yeah. I picked that picture because I figured they'd be bored and confused by my presentation, so.
He's looking sideways.
The other one's asleep.
You had mentioned the high-speed rail earlier and some land that the agency has purchased and now potentially high-speed rail going through there. Are they subject to any of the fees and stuff that the HCA would have?
No, but they'd have to, so it's a land donation, but they'd have to compensate us for the loss of that land, whatever its fair market value would be.
But
Yep.
if the future train goes through any of our planned areas, planned covered areas, they're not subject to pay?
No, they'd be subject to the old process of seeking their permits from all the regulatory agencies, independent of the habitat plan. Yeah, it's not a covered activity.
Yes, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Themselves.
So, you know, and speaking of high-speed rail.
Yes.
I mean, you had some partners that we're working with to potentially acquire lands. I mean, the high-speed rail has a whole advanced mitigation
Yes.
group, or a couple of people anyway. Have they approached us to work in collaboration for acquiring
Yes.
land?
Yes, we had 2 meetings with them in San Francisco. Tara and I did, when was that, Tara? About a month ago? And they actually talked to us about that, that they might, yeah, there is a potential they would partner with us on an acquisition. And the way it would work is similar to the way we're doing with PG&E, is that if we acquired a 3,000 acre parcel and they needed 1,000 acres for mitigation for the train, that would be set aside for them. They'd set up an endowment, and we would manage the entire landscape per our habitat plan rules. And the wildlife agencies seem to be okay with that approach. I don't know if they're gonna do it. They're talking to a lot of people and a lot of different options they're exploring. But we've told them we'd be very interested in doing that. Because given how expensive land is, getting a well-funded partner like that could make a deal happen quick versus our lumbering process of getting all the funders lined up. And then the investors jump in and outbid us, so.
That's why there's no more burrowing owls in Gilroy, because
Yeah,
we have.
they are cute.
We have a lot of mountain lion sightings.
Well, anything, can- I mean,
Recently.
coyotes,
Really?
cats, snakes.
One about 2
Yeah,
blocks from
they're,
my house,
they,
'cause I live close to the hill.
they have a symbiotic relationship
2
with
weeks
the
ago, there
ground
was 2
squirrels and in the Midwest with prairie dogs. So they help each other with alarms. So when the prairie dogs get kind of agitated or the ground squirrels and sound out alarms, the burrowing owls kind of know something's up. And I've seen footage of burrowing owls fighting with snakes, you know, like flying and diving them in. So they disperse quickly. So as soon as there's a problem, they fly away from the burrow. But yeah, their young are very susceptible. There was some killed out at Don Edwards where we're working with them. The snakes ate some eggs and one of the adults. So
We gotta get up in the
Yeah.
trees.
and feral cats are a problem for sure.
So does that conclude our workshop?
It does.
Super, thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, so we're early?
We
We're
got
done
10 minutes,
early?
yep.
Oh,
To stretch and,
so we're not going over this then? Just a
Oh,
FYI?
is that for next time?
That's March 16th.
Maybe it's
So
for- maybe it's
this
for-
one is for our regular meeting?
I think,
Oh,
I
it's
probably
probably
is.
yeah.
Yeah, the joint meeting. Says.
Okay.
This one doesn't turn off, does it?
Oh, I don't know how that works. Oh, doesn't look like it.
No, it doesn't have a.
I was there, I checked out 10 minutes early. Come down here.
It's hard to be at 2 places at once. You had what?
That housing thing was good.
Anything at all?
The housing meeting was good.
Yes.
was good.
It was really well
Okay.
spoken to
Okay.
people.
What-
Hi, Linda.
What's your last name again? Or
Oh, hello.
Jennifer?
Good, thank you.
Thank you. Whereas therefore,
Okay, took Andrew. Is he their director now? Okay. Well, good for him. Sorry for us, but
go ahead. Let me get situated here, get the agenda out.
Okay.
By the way, the only town that has roundabouts. Awesome. You don't like them? I love them.
Not cooperating right now.
That's how people feel about roundabouts.
I love
About
them.
There it is.
That's how,
Okay. Hello, everyone.
hello, Mr. Chair.
Oh, yeah, so this is what I get for missing a meeting. I become the chair.
We did do that, didn't we?
Yes, you did, and believe me, I will.
And we enjoyed it, is that right?
I have a long memory. I'm like an elephant.
Guys, don't pick on him, it's already 5 after 3.
Says the man who always starts on time and ends on time. So I guess I am reconvening because the meeting was convened for the budget workshop. Is that correct? Okay, so then I will be reconvening the governing board. And did we open the implementation board as well?
I don't think we did, unless, were there any implementation board members at the workshop? Okay, then
Yes.
we're reconvening the implementation board as well.
Okay. So moving right along then, we'll start with the report from the chair. Again, I have learned a very valuable lesson. I will not miss any meetings ever, even if my legs are broken. And actually,
Welcome, Chair.
Supervisor Wasserman actually made it to a meeting where I believe you were on crutches and
did.
on Vicodin,
Back was killing
and
me.
his back was killing him. So my
I'll
only
be a
excuse.
fireman when I grow up, so.
My only excuse was I was out of town. But anyway, so that is my report. I will now turn it over to the chair of the implementation board for her report.
I really have no report other than to welcome everyone and thank everyone for coming, and we'll move forward.
All right, fantastic. And then now I will open it for the report from the Public Advisory Commission, Mr. Walt Grimes.
Thank you, and welcome to Morgan Hill on this prime sunny day. The Jan Hintemeister and Craig Edgerton, who were both on the Public Advisory Committee, were part of the group that about a month or so ago took part in the burrowing owl survey south of here. And actually, I hooked up with Craig afterwards at a wine reception at Guglielmo Winery, and so I got a firsthand. And you know, it is burrowing owls. If you folks, anyone saw the pictures that were part of the budget presentation, I think that is a great example of how the burrowing owl is. People just love them. And then also, we in a recent, or last week in a function in Gilroy, High-Speed Rail gave another presentation, and the timeline on the EIR is now slipping to December. So it goes on, and that's it.
Is there something by phone?
I would do it. Chairman Constantine, we have a new member of the implementation board here today, and her name is Jennifer Carmen, and she's replacing Andrew Crabtree, and she's the new community development director, as you probably know that too.
Yes, and I didn't see her as new because I've seen her for the last 5 weeks, so my apologies. Welcome aboard. You got put on because you weren't here either. Okay, so at this moment, I will open it for public comment. Oh, actually, I was reminded, do we need to do a roll call of?
Yes, I think so, right?
I can do a roll call.
Okay, why don't we go ahead and do that then?
Chairs Constantine,
Here.
Lazat.
Here.
Board members Arenas.
Here.
Panikar. Courtney. Wasserman.
Here.
Tucker.
Here?
Calnan. Here. Carmen.
Here.
Well done.
Okay.
Quorum.
Thank you very much. And we have a quorum for both? Okay, both boards? Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, public comment. At this point, we will open it for public comment. This is for public comment that are for items that are not on this agenda. And do we have anyone to make comment? Seeing no one, we'll move past that, and then we'll go to start regular business for the Joint Governing and Implementation Board action. Item number 1, approve the minutes for the January 19th, 2017 regular joint meeting.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, that motion carries. And then we have the second item, which is the report from the executive officer.
You know, only 2 items today, one of which will be a presentation on the burrowing owl, getting the board up to date on what's going on with burrowing owls in the county, and which improving the impact fee zone is on the consent agenda for the governing board. And the other item is, just to bring to your attention, the National Habitat Conservation Plan Coalition, which is in its second year of existence, is going to Washington next week. I'm not going this year, but representatives from a couple of the HCPs in Texas, Florida, private wind energy HCPs, and also from Northern and Southern California. And I believe somebody from Oregon is also going to meet with their various congressional delegations from both sides of the aisle to lobby for the continued funding of the Section 6 program, which helps with land acquisitions and planning for HCPs. And we created this here locally as sort of our contribution to this effort. We put together this handout that'll be left behind with the agency staff and the electeds next week. Just one. So now we'll have Troy come up and give you an up-to-date on what's going on with burrowing owls in our plan area. Thank you, Troy.
Are we operational? Okay, good. Hi, everyone. I'm Troy Ramick with ICF. I know some of you, but not all of you, so thanks for having me. As I said to the Public Advisory Committee a couple months ago, this is my annual pilgrimage to you to talk to you about what's happening, all things burrowing owl, and it sounds like you talked a little bit about that already during the budget session. So some of this won't be new, but some of it probably will. So as you know, we, as a requirement of the Habitat Plan, we have the burrowing owl conservation strategy, and we do an annual burrowing owl survey. So I'm going to talk to you about what we did in 2016, what the results were, and then what that means with respect to both the recovery of the owls and the fee zone related to that, those changes. Give you a quick update on some of the other ongoing studies that the Habitat Agency is involved with. Some of the management agreements that we've invested in, and then we had a species recovery workshop almost exactly a month ago, so I'll give you a little bit of an update on what happened there and what to expect from that. So the survey effort last year, the charge for the Habitat Agency each year is not to do all the surveys, but to coordinate them, and so that's ICF helped with that coordination effort last year, just like we have in years past. And the objectives, as they have been for the last couple of years, were to survey all the known nesting locations in the South Bay area, mostly in Santa Clara County, a little bit in Alameda County. To also monitor overwintering locations. So sometimes those are the same as the nesting locations, but oftentimes they're different. They're up in the hills outside of town a little bit. So we wanted to get a good handle on where birds were not just nesting, but where they're overwintering. And then we, most of our effort this past year beyond where we know owls are was in the southern part of the county, right on the San Benito County line. We think there's a lot of potential down there for owls. There historically have been owls in and around that kind of county line area, so we wanted to look at that a little more closely. And as in years past, we were able to do all of those things. So we did, we had survey coverage for all of the key nesting locations. In the county, we expanded our survey effort to the southern part of the county, both to, not only look for owls, but also get a better handle on the habitat quality down there, to think about the potential for, future management actions down in that area that might attract owls to the southern part of the county. And then I always put this bullet on there because I think we kind of take it for granted now, but we stayed coordinated throughout the whole process. And so, before the habitat plan came on board years back, there's been people surveying and studying burrowing owls in the South Bay forever, but it's never been as coordinated as it is now, and I think that's a direct result of the work that the Habitat Agency is doing. And when I, throughout the presentation, I keep saying we did this and we did that, we surveyed this and that, and really this is the we, so really what we did was we set up the conference calls and the meetings to make sure that everybody was on board. But a lot of different entities and a lot of different people surveyed burrowing owls. Some of them with some funding from the Habitat Agency, but most of them were doing it because they had a charge from their agency or a mitigation requirement from their agency, and many of them just volunteered their time. So a really good example where just through coordination, I think we're getting a lot of benefit for relatively moderate amount of funding. So a lot of goodwill here, I think, as well in the community. And the survey coverage looks like this. A lot of little tiny things that you can't read, although in the annual report that we produced that's in your board packet, you can see this map and then a series of other maps that kind of zooms in on these areas. But essentially, the colors are the most important. So the green areas are areas that were surveyed in 2016. The red are areas that were not surveyed, and that was because we looked at them in years past and decided it wasn't really worth going back for various reasons, probably because the habitat quality was not great. And then the yellow areas are places we surveyed in 2016, and as a result of looking at the habitat quality, we're able to kind of refine those areas. So we won't have to go back to those areas again this year. We can have a little bit more of a focused effort in those locations. And I think I talked about this last year, but one of the real wins with this program so far is that all those little things you see on the left-hand side of that map are the names of all of the individual little sites that people survey. And it took us 3 years, but we finally got a nomenclature that everybody agrees to. So we are calling everything the same thing, which sounds silly, but that's hugely important. And then when we go out to these sites and are looking for owls, oftentimes we don't find them, but we take other data on those sites, mainly a quantification of whether or not the site is currently good habitat for owls or might be in the future with some management action. And that just helps with long-term planning if we're looking for opportunities for management agreements and so forth. We have some data there. No surprise that the key nesting locations remain Shoreline at Mountain View, the golf course in Mountain View, the San Jose Santa Clara Regional Wastewater Facility, Moffett Airfield, also in Mountain View, San Jose International Airport, and Don Edwards Warm Springs Unit. The interesting thing that we always think about when we see this list is that either they're not inside the plan area or they are and they're not explicitly covered activities by the habitat plan. So it's always been a bit of a challenge or a bit of a dichotomy there as we think about managing for owls, and we don't have a lot of control over the actual nesting locations, which I'll talk about later. The numbers look like this for 2016. I'll put this in context over the last 3 years in the next slide. But just know the numbers are down, and so a couple of things to note here. One is overall the numbers are down. There's a couple of anomalies there, which I'll point out in a second. But probably most importantly, the number of locations where owls are nesting is down. So not only are there fewer breeding pair in the county, they're in fewer locations. And what that really means is, any sort of kind of ecology 101 would tell you that if you have the owls in fewer locations, they're more susceptible to, disease or just a bad year on a site could wipe out a local population or an individual population or something like that. So we start to get worried not just because the owls are reduced in number, but because they're in a reduced number of locations as well. Oh, sorry, and just to point out, this is actually what we're reporting here is the number of adult owls present during the breeding season. So that's the metric that we're tracking, that we're charged to track as part of the habitat plan implementation, number of adult owls. And the distribution of occupied habitat is a term that comes right out of the habitat plan, and it really means a nesting location and suitable habitat within a half mile of those nesting locations. So we're trying to pick up foraging habitat that's supporting those nest locations as well. And this is what the distribution of that looks like after or as of last year. Owls are just now, it's March, so owls are just now starting to show up on breeding grounds this year and select sites, so we don't quite know what the story is yet this year, but this is what it looked like last year. And I'll explain how this translates into the permit zone, or the fee zones, in a second. And looking back a couple of years, you can see, just looking at the totals at the bottom, we've essentially, since 2014, really since we fully implemented this survey program, the number of adult owls during the nesting season has dropped from 107 to 62. So not quite a 50% drop, but pretty close. And the main reason for that, as I mentioned, we're seeing a few of these kind of random locations where we had owls spread around. We're seeing those kind of gone away in the last couple of years. So the owls are really concentrated in these handful of sites. And that's sort of, we have this catch-all row called other locations. Those are sporadic owl nesting locations around the county, and we didn't have any of those in 2016. So they're all concentrated in these handful of sites. Interestingly, this year, I was just talking with some people before the meeting. It'll be interesting to see what happens this year, because two of our key locations, the Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge, their Warm Springs unit, and the Regional Wastewater Treatment Facility, they're pretty flooded right now. It's not uncommon. They're heavily wetland influenced. But what that means is there's less suitable habitat right now for owls as they're showing up to breed. So what we might find when we do the survey this year is that owls, if they don't stick around in those locations, they may spread out again to some of these random sites around the county. So we may, those numbers may change next year, and it may be a result of the conditions of the sites right now when owls are showing up to breed. Just speculation at this point, though. So what does this mean for fees? And you're going to talk about this later, but the fee zones, as you may recall, it's the same as occupied habitat. So it's basically a known nest location and a half-mile buffer around that nest location. And we track that for 3 years. So just because there wasn't a nesting owl in a location last year, if there was the year before or 2 years before, we would carry that forward. So it's a 3-year kind of moving fee zone. So the fee zone that you see this year represents nesting results from 2014, 2015, 2016. And I'll show you the maps that break that down. So going back in time, one thing I'm going to tell you in a minute is that the fee zone has reduced quite a bit. But the reason for that is because when we started this process, the first full year we did surveys was 2014. And the first fee map that was published was basically based on data that pre-existed our annual surveys. And so what we did was we pulled all the information from the habitat plan when it was published and made that first fee map kind of all-inclusive of that, because we didn't have a good sense of when things were last observed. So the first fee map was all-encompassing, included all that data. So this year is the first year that some of those original data are going to fall off the map, in other words. So we're outside of that 3-year window for them. So on this figure, you see the base fee zones in gray. So a lot of those gray areas are going to fall out of the fee zone this year because of that, because we haven't had owls there since then. And if we carry that forward just 1 year, this then basically represents what the fee zone is going to look like this year. And so this is the culmination of 2014, 2015, and 2016. And as we then carry that into what a fee map might look like, obviously the fees are only applied inside of the plan area, so we don't worry about the stuff in Mountain View and Fremont and everywhere else. And then so the fee zone looks like this. So those polygons are made up of those 3 survey years, basically. Glasses. And just a quick comparison of what it looked like last year versus what it looks like this year, with a couple of inset maps here, where basically we've dropped almost 2,400 acres out of out of the fee zone, and that's not that the owls suddenly like disappeared, it's that we lost those 2013 occurrences, which were kind of relic from when the plan was published. So that's what we have, and what you have in your resolution for later then is basically the approval of this new fee map.
Could you
Yep.
repeat what you just said?
With respect to the changes from last year to this year?
What the 23 acres, you said it really was getting rid of some areas that aren't relevant anymore?
Yep. So the fee zone is comprised of the last 3 years of survey data, right? And we still had, on last year's fee map, we still had information on there from 2013, so 2013, 14, and 15. And the 2013 data, it wasn't based on survey information because we hadn't done surveys yet. 2014 was the first survey year. So the 2013 data was really pulled straight out of the habitat plan, and it was this kind of culmination of historical information and data that was published in the habitat plan, basically the kind of current understanding of burrowing owl distribution in the county. And so this year is the first year that we're not counting 2013 information anymore, and so that's why that 2,400 acres has gone away. So I didn't want you to think that all of a sudden we just the owls just left from that area. Is that they were never there. Yeah. They were just never there, but we were carrying it forward because it was part of that 3-year window. Any other questions on that, Ann?
Has the geo browser online been updated to reflect this?
The new fee zone?
Yeah.
I don't know. Probably after today, right?
After today.
Okay.
And it'll be effective July 1st.
Yes.
Wondering, this sort of goes beyond the fee zone map, to how it fits into the goals of the habitat plan related to species, continuing and restoring and growing the population size. If the area is shrinking and the population is shrinking, what does that, overall mean if we can't charge except in the areas where they actually are? And, how does that impact the goals, the expectations of the regulatory agency? You can get to that as you move through your presentation.
I'm looking at Ed to answer that
I've got that question in my head, so.
Yeah, both of us can address this from different perspectives. So it's a covered species, and we still have 46 years to recover it. But a lot of the work was anticipated to be done in the first 10, 15 years of the plan to recover the species. And a lot of the revenues that would be collected to implement the burrowing owl strategy were envisioned to be collected within that first 10 years also. So the biggest concern I have is what you just described, is that the foraging habitat is shrinking, the birds are still staying in place, and now the populations are starting to shrink. And that was part of the burrowing owl workshop that we had, experts workshop last month, where we had individuals from Canada and around the U.S. that came here to share their ideas on how to help us achieve our objective of recovering the population. And their recommendations were from pretty simple stuff. There might be some, because we see these birds in the foothills all the time. Tara just saw some at Clara the other day. They're out on Coyote Ridge. We heard reports they're on Richmond Ranch. So are they breeding there? We know at Calero they're not. But and if they aren't breeding there, maybe they're breeding somewhere near there. So some of the recommendations were, well, try to find if there's other populations in, let's say, Shingle Valley, out by San Felipe Ranch, maybe in areas around Calero, and there might be these populations that nobody knew about. I'm pessimistic on that, but we need to look. And then the other recommendations were more dramatic. You could argue draconian, captive breeding, and translocation of the birds through something called hacking, where you create these enclosures where the birds are, you put 2 pair in an enclosure and you get them to breed, and then you keep the young and the adults in that enclosure for a period of time, you feed them, and then you remove the enclosure, hoping that the young, not necessarily the adults, will then develop site fidelity. So most people locally are very concerned about, me included, that the population is declining and the birds aren't moving to other places. But what Troy alluded to earlier might be an opportunity where the flooding of these sites may lead the birds to move to other areas, because ultimately I don't think it's sustainable in the northern part of the county for the long-term survivability of those birds because of the basically development pressure. And if they don't start moving to Calero and Shingle Valley and South County, I'm not super optimistic that we'll have burrowing owls in the plan area 20 years from now. Things could change because there is a lot of land on shoreline, and Warm Springs is a large area too, but they don't seem to be breeding the way one would expect in those areas.
So if the fee area reduces in size, does that mean the fee increases on sort of a proportional basis to compensate for?
No.
No.
Yeah, the burrowing owl fee is based strictly on the CPI. So there's no so as the fee area shrinks, then yes, there's a corresponding potential loss in revenues too. So it's a catch-22.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would add maybe just a couple thoughts. One is, I think from the beginning, even from the day the plan was approved, we knew at least one reality was that all of the funding that has to fund burrowing owl conservation for 50 years is going to come in the first 10 or whatever. So we knew there was going to be a rationing that had to happen to make sure that we could do what we said we were going to do. So that's one part of it that we're still doing. And then based on everything that you asked and that Ed said, I think it's pretty clear, in the recovery workshop was the beginning of this, but I think it's pretty clear that we are headed towards a pretty serious conversation about burrowing owls in the near term. What should the priorities be? We pretty much know what our funding is going to be for that species. And so how can we best spend that money? And that's the recovery workshop is the beginning of that discussion, and we'll continue to have it with the locals and with you and everybody else. But that's kind of where we are right now. And speaking of where we're spending some of the money, some quick study updates. So Ed was just talking about getting a better handle on the wintering locations for burrowing owls. So certainly all the places where we have owls during the nesting season, they also stay there during the winter. Some of them migrate a long way, some of them move up into the hills, and some stay there. But it's rare, and I would say right now it's pretty much never happens that we have owls both nesting and overwintering up outside of the valley floor, so up in the hills, as far as we know. And as Ed said, we're kind of investigating that. So the first part of that investigation is to just get a better handle on the birds that are overwintering in the hills. Where are they coming from? Are they coming from our local nesting populations, or from nesting areas far and away? I mean, we have had owls in the county from as far away as Alberta, so owls do move quite far. Wow. So that's one thing, get a handle on where they are and where are they from, who are they, right? And then the second part of that is, can we convince them to stay? So we never have the problem of convincing anybody to come to California and stay, but for some reason burrowing owls don't like to come here and stay. And so we're trying to figure out, how can we keep them here? So little things like, if we know that they are overwintering in a location, sometimes they stay there all the way up until right now, till March, and we're like, looks like they're going to nest this year, and then next thing you know, they're gone. And so we're trying some things like supplemental feeding, so feeding them at those locations to convince them to stay. And there are some other techniques that may be tried in the future, but that's an example of just, how can we slightly influence what the animals are doing to keep them here. And then the other part of that is thinking a little bit more strategically about opportunities on public lands, burrowing owl habitat on public lands. So Dr. Lynn Trulio from San Jose State and Sandra Mazel, one of her colleagues, are working on a study now with funding from the Habitat Agency to do a bit of a detailed habitat model for where owls are. So looking at past locations of owls and, finding out what the habitat parameters are around those locations and doing some modeling, and then further looking at where does that habitat land on public lands. So what that really means is where are the places where we have the best opportunity to partner with public agencies to do something to try to attract owls to those locations. Another way to think about that would be if we get to the place where we have to start moving owls around, where could we move them to? And this might be the first place we might start looking. So that work is happening now, and Sandra will be out in the field this summer, kind of ground truthing a lot of that work.
Stop you for just a second. We have a question.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. It ties into what you just said about moving the owl. We did talk about burrowing owls earlier. I see those pictures, and they're just the cutest little things. But I certainly understand between development and predators, snakes and coyotes and hawks and God knows what, because they're on the ground instead of up in the tree. Moving them someplace else, like you just mentioned now, when you do that, kind of a habitat, when you do that, do you also then preclude natural predators from getting into their sanctuary so that you build up the population? Because I know, like with bald eagles, there weren't a lot of predators except for man and poison and all the rest, and they were able to do that. But these little guys, if you moved them from here over to here, there's going to be cats and snakes and stuff over here anyway.
Yeah.
So is the plan with your organization, your emphasis, your everything on trying to increase the population, moving them somewhere that prohibits predators from getting to them until you build them up and release them into the wild, or what's the plan?
What others have found in mostly Southern California, and a few of the experts that we had come in for this workshop talked a lot about this. I guess a couple things. One is certainly if you were to move them from one location to another, there's Ed mentioned the word hacking. It's a big enclosure basically that you would have the birds in for a short period of time, mostly to keep them there, not to keep things out, but to keep them there until
I understood the hacking idea to be a smaller, not a large area. I thought that was more on an animal by animal.
It is.
Like
That's right. That's right. It is. Yeah, it is.
Okay.
And really what that is to keep them there for that kind of initial vulnerable time. It also would keep predators out. That's not the primary purpose of it, but so that's a reality. But what we're seeing from other places is that the biggest issue that owls have, and this is true for Santa Clara County, it's not predators necessarily, except in some cases when they're near urbanization, things like feral cats can be an issue, or other commensal predator or species like skunks and raccoons and so forth. But really, it's like that's not what's causing the problem. It's really the lack of foraging habitat. So if we can get them into a more open area, they're actually pretty tenacious when it comes to predators. I mean, they did evolve as a ground nesting bird, so they're pretty good at fending off predators. That's probably not the, I mean, that's an issue, but it's probably not the biggest issue for their decline in this area. It's probably other things, mostly habitat loss due to land conversion and so forth. What we're thinking and what we've seen in Southern California and other places is that if you can just get them out of harm's way, and by that I mean basically kind of away from urbanization, the rest will take care of itself. So predators won't, I mean, it'll be a bit of an issue, but it won't be of primary concern. The one thing I would point out,
I just bring that up because sometimes like zoos took on pandas.
Yeah, right.
Okay, and the raising of pandas, and other organizations rescue animals from the sea, restore them, return them. And I just wondered if you, and I know that I'm getting a little off base here, but these little guys just got to me.
Yeah.
The, working with a zoo and getting some area within a zoo to relocate burrowing owls and get their population going and going and going and going, and people can watch them in the meantime. And
yeah, and not a zoo necessarily, but we have been talking with, I'm blanking on the Silicon Valley something or other.
Place in Milpitas, the animal rescue shelter in Milpitas.
Okay.
I forget their name.
It's an animal rescue shelter, but they're building in the process of building a new kind of state-of-the-art species recovery facility, not for burrowing owls specifically, but for lots of species. And we've been talking to them about, well, could you build a burrowing owl wing or whatever, pardon the pun. That wasn't on purpose, but it was funny, you're right. But it gets to that idea of, is there a way that we could produce a bunch of owls in a hurry and then put them out on the landscape? And that's certainly something that we're considering, because one of the issues we have right now is we can talk about all this stuff like, well, what if we move the owls from here to here, but we don't have that many owls, period. And so if we start doing risky things like that, it just ups the ante with the resource agencies and the local people who are interested in owls and us, to make sure that we do it right the first time, so we don't lose the few owls that we have. So,
Okay, thank you.
so we
I've
thought
used
about
enough
that.
time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, it's great. It's a great question.
And this center that Troy referred to is going to be built in Saratoga.
Yeah.
Anytime soon, because I heard it was like gonna take a while.
Yeah, it's not, they haven't broken ground. I'm not sure. It's a couple years, I think.
I think
right?
so, yeah.
Start cloning.
So some other just quick general updates. As you know, different from some of the other, or all of the other covered species, with burrowing owls, we do these kind of short-term management agreements where we provide some funding for local agencies to do management activities on their lands. And we've seen some real gains there, for example, at Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge, where with some funding from the Habitat Agency, they've been able to do some habitat augmentation and do some burrowing owl monitoring out there, and we actually have birds once again at Don Edwards. Same with the regional wastewater facility, so the monitoring and some of the habitat management that happens out there is funded by the Habitat Agency, and we're doing really well there. And then the others are just the American Center Open Space Preservation, that's previously known as Steel Wave.
Troy, I think we're going to have to stop because I think you need to get going. Am I correct?
Oh, I'm sorry.
And then we'd lose our
Yeah,
quorum.
let's do the quorum stuff.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
I was done. I'm done. Look.
You're not asleep.
Motion to approve.
Well, we do have some action items outside the consent calendar,
Yeah, we
so.
can, so the consent agenda is approved. Okay, right? A vote, okay, thank you.
Okay, hold on, just stop for just a second. Let's get control of this for a second. So,
Yeah.
if we adopt the consent calendar, and if Sylvia has to leave, the 7 and 8, or 6 and 7 rather, are for the governing board, and then we have one item for the implementation board. Do we lose quorum? We're okay on implementation
Yeah.
board? Okay, so at this point then, can you hang for just 5 minutes?
Yes.
Okay, totally understand.
No, it's okay.
I had a motion and a second for the consent calendar. I would like to ask if there was anyone in the audience that would like to make comment on both the,
Doug said no.
okay, Doug said no? All right, so, okay, so moving right along, I have a motion and a second.
Yeah, she needs a roll call.
I'm sorry? Yeah, who was the second? I didn't even know who made the motion.
Motion, second.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, so, roll call vote? Do you have to have a roll call vote for everything? No. So, okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries, and I just was remiss in my report, and I just really quick, I wanted to thank the previous chair of the governing board for allowing me to take his position, and to thank him for doing such a fantastic job. Okay, now, moving on to regular business, item number 6, which is the 2017-18 development fee adjustment.
Yeah, and I'll be real brief. These are automatic increases, but we feel it's important to come to the governing board to get their blessing of these increases. And it was through an ordinance where the fees are automatically go up. So for land cover, serpentine, and nitrogen fees, they're going to go up 5.3% starting July 1st. The other two fees, burrowing owl and wetland mitigation, will increase by 2.5. So the first three are based on the housing index and the CPI. The second second grouping of fees is strictly based on the CPI. So it's to approve a resolution, saying that these are okay to go up.
Okay, so are there any questions? Okay, just one question. Now, the stipulation was, even though these are automatic, and it's in the report, that it was just because the Habitat Conservation Plan is so new, is why
Yes.
we're asking the governing board to provide a resolution. Is this something that we're gonna go forward in the future? So next year, we're gonna have to do the resolution again, or no, this is just for this year?
I will talk to council about that, but I was thinking about that very much, that issue today, Chairman. And
Okay.
I was thinking maybe we can be free as a bird.
As it were? Okay, okay.
And not worry about this next year.
Fantastic. Any other questions? Okay, and now open it for public comment. And seeing none, I'll ask for a motion or discussion on this item.
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, motion and a second. All in favor? Say something, guys. Any opposed? Okay, all right. All right, moving on to item 7, which is the participating,
Yes, so we're currently.
yeah, I did. Sorry.
Currently, the fee is $5,000 or 10% of the total fees that they pay. For the sake of our board member here, it's basically to increase it from 5 to 10,000.
100%
And
increase.
it essentially because I feel the co-permittees and the agency feels the co-permittees are subsidizing PSE applications or participation in the plan, and this is sort of to level the playing field a little bit. And the justification for it is, let's see, there's also a cost to the agency of general inquiries, pre-application assistance, as well as costs of overseeing post-approval work such as monitoring. Additionally, there is a cost to managing the reserve system since the endowment is not yet fully funded. So this is a way to, at least in a small way, capture some of those necessary expenses that we incur for managing land, to mitigate PSE applications, and for doing work that's outside the scope of the PSE application. So it will not apply to restoration projects, this increase, because there is a benefit for us to support restoration projects.
Okay, are there any questions on this item? Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion or discussion to approve the item. Anyone on the governing board?
Fine, so moved.
And a second. Okay, motion, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. And that will bring us to any future agenda items for the governing board. Anyone on the governing board wish to add?
And she can.
Yeah, so seeing none, okay, you can go back to San Jose?
Thank you very much. I appreciate this.
All right, and with that, I will then adjourn the governing board meeting. Whew, that kind of went really.
Good job.
I lost a little control there over a second. It was just whizzing by me there. Yeah.
That's right, that's right.
Reconvening the implementation board, we have no consent calendar items. A regular business is a revision of the habitat plan temporary impact definition. The staff
Yes,
had any report? It was an easy read.
Oh, good. Jerry's going to give you a very short presentation on that to just tell you some of the rationale behind it. It's a good thing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hi,
Easy
Derek.
to read because I'm a simple person. So keep it that way. The request before you is approval of a minor modification to the habitat plan. This is a modification of the text. The plan provides for clarifications and interpretations which can be handled administratively. Minor modifications are small changes that require approval of your board, but fall short of the requirement for an amendment, full-blown amendment of the plan. So this is a way we can kind of handle these changes without having them pile up too much. The specific request today is to allow for certain in-stream projects to be considered temporary, even if the implementation of the project occurs over 1 calendar year. So currently the plan definitions of temporary impacts describe those temporary impacts as a duration of less than 1 calendar year with the additional requirement that the site be restored completely within one year following completion of the project. So a permanent impact then would be any project that has a duration that exceeds 1 year. Example of a typical project with temporary impacts would be construction of maybe a small office building that has an outside storage, staging area, parking area that would be used just for the duration of the construction. So it would be returned to existing site conditions after the project's done. That would be a temporary impact. Also replacing gas or water pipelines where you dig it up, bury it, reseed or revegetate, and the site's restored within 1 calendar year. So unless a project meets those kinds of definitions or temporal conditions, it would be considered a permanent impact. An example of a project with in-channel impacts would be replacement of a bridge or culvert, where the project might take maybe 9 months to complete, but because it can only be constructed during the driest months of the year, it can only be worked on for about 4 months out of the year. This would be true for dewatering projects where they're going to be constructing foundations, taking out head walls and things like that. So because they'd have to come back in subsequent years, it extends the project duration for longer than 1 calendar year. And if that's the case, then it would be considered a permanent impact, and permanent impact fees would apply. Permanent impact fees, temporary impact fees can be as little as 3% of permanent impact fees. So this can be a difference between $300 or $10,000 for a project. So it's pretty considerable for some projects. The issue centers on what is meant by 1 year in this case. So 1 year can mean a calendar year, implying that all activities would have to occur within a single 365-day time span. About a year ago, Santa Clara County Roads and Airports, one of our co-permittees approached us and had requested that we can consider projects to be considered temporary if the in-stream construction activity is less than 365 cumulative days. It's not looking at a calendar, but looking at the total number of days of actual work. This would be true if the stream function is restored between the seasonal work periods too. That's an important characteristic here. And if that's the case, then maybe only temporary fees would be assessed. So we prepared the minor modification memo that you all have in front of you. Really the only change is one sentence in the definition of temporary impacts. And we propose the definition to include the following distinction, that is, certain in-stream projects that require multiple construction seasons to complete, but which result in less than 365 cumulative days of impact, are also considered temporary. The added text then refers the reader back to minor modification number HPM 2017-01 for additional restrictions and limitations on this consideration. So we consider this to be a reasonable compromise to afford some relief from the high cost of in-stream public works projects whose impacts really should be truly considered temporary. We're not here to bust anybody's chops. So with that, we'd like to recommend your board take action to approve the minor modification. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Yes?
Any questions?
I have a
Oh,
question.
go ahead,
if you
Rob.
don't mind. I'm wondering, my question goes to the definition of what's an impact, right? The example you gave of clearing a spot to provide temporary parking, does that mean that you have to restore the spot after each construction season?
It would depend on the nature of the impact. If they're actually getting in there and removing topsoil or moving topsoil around, they would have to restore it. Oftentimes you'll see those temporary staging areas occur on the grassland, the area that's already flat. If that's the case, reseeding it's probably sufficient. But if there are more impacts, we would have to have some revegetation. And if that occurs within 1 year, it's still considered temporary.
And this is limited to in-stream dewatering.
And usually your in-stream permits, the permits that you require, you have to winterize your site before, as you come out of the construction season. So I would assume that all that winterizing is what you're determining is restoring the site somewhat.
Yes. And the restoration action can occur beyond the 1 year time frame too. We tried to also do a modification for riparian areas, looking at degraded areas that if the project could be done in less than 1 year because of staging activities, they're there longer, and the wildlife agencies balked at that, but they were comfortable with allowing dewatering to happen over multiple years, but like Jerry said, within that 365 cumulative timeframe.
They could
Any other
theoretically
questions?
come back three years to finish a project as long as the stream function is restored in between those.
In between.
Those
Good.
periods, right?
Good, good. Any other questions? Any public comment? Seeing none,
Motion to approve.
Second.
moved and seconded. Doesn't look like we need a resolution, so all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? That motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well-written memo. I really breezed right through that.
And it has my name on there, but Jerry wrote it.
All
But
right, Jerry. All
I
right,
probably
Jerry.
should, I probably should take credit because of all the compliments you were giving it. Yes, I wrote it. Yes, thank you.
I noticed Jerry's
Yeah.
verbiage. I
Yeah,
could
you said,
figure
I
it
know
out. I
that
could
Sullivan
figure-
and how he
Yeah.
writes, so.
I can see it. All right, next item, future implementation board initiated agenda items. There are none.
That's it, that's all you get.
Implementation board adjournment. Pay attention to the list of upcoming meetings, everyone, and put them on your calendars. One item, we're out of here.
Wow.
Thank you.
Hey, we did the tough stuff. We do the implementation.
You see that? We have a meeting, oh, you're only in Bethesda.
No, I'm only,
So, starting in May, we have one in May,
Yeah.
June, July,
If you
no,
have a question
August,
for you,
and
you can ask
September.
no,
Implementation is May and July, but governing board is June.
oh, so we're not gonna be all together?
No,
Any more
on
except for
these two.
September?